Can you recommend some way to live with severe childhood trauma? Okay, the first thing we need to learn is what is trauma. For the duration of this video at least, forget everything you've learned about trauma and psychology and all these terms and fields of study that we've established. Let's detach ourselves from all that and pretend that we're a non-human species and we're looking at humans. We might say that humans have a remarkably dynamic nervous system that can switch between sympathetic and parasympathetic very easily. The sympathetic nervous system is summarized as fight or flight, and the parasympathetic as rest and digest. Trauma is a conditioned sympathetic activation. One of the primary roles of a human parent is to teach their children how to regulate their nervous systems. This is why parents read bedtime stories or sing lullabies or lay down with their child or just kind of teach them how to breathe and how to calm themselves. This will reactivate the parasympathetic nervous system. Whatever sort of traumatic event or activity is happening, it's activating the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response. In cases of childhood trauma, most of that is caused by one or both parents. Rather than teaching their child how to regulate their nervous system, they become the cause of a dysregulated nervous system. And there will be moments where the kid is crying or screaming or acting out in some way as they're trying to reduce the inflammation and that fight or flight response. Their body's out of homeostasis and they're uncomfortable, and they're responding to all this nauseous stimulation by acting in some sort of way. Parents will take this to mean as a misbehavior of the child, and they will discipline them. This disciplinary action starts to condition the child, what you would call traumatizing them, into not being able to regulate that nervous system. When a child is exposed to nauseous stimulation and they can't regulate that nervous system, they can only do one thing, which is escape from that painful stimulation. And this is the neurological breakthrough that I will continue to reference until everybody knows what it is. And this is the visual signals overriding pain signals. Visual signals overriding the somatosensory signals. Instead of being taught how to navigate and regulate all of those painful stimuli, they retreat from it. If the environment a child is growing up in is purely a fight or flight situation, they will have to dissociate in order to survive it. And you might say that the parents probably grew up that way, and that's the only way they know how to regulate their own nervous system, and they teach that to their child. A very telltale sign that a child is in fight or flight throughout their home is when they're outside of that home and they're acting out in different ways. This is going to be a very cathartic experience for them because maybe they'll giggle at everything, maybe they're just going to touch everything, maybe they're going to talk a lot or do sort of different movements. They can't sit still, they're going to squirm. It's because they're finally able to relax and they're somatically feeling their body for the first time in could be days or weeks. It's because they're outside of that immediately threatening environment that they're finally able to activate that parasympathetic nervous system. But you're not allowed to act out in different spaces, public spaces, schools, or other people's houses, and so the child is disciplined even harder. This goes on for the entire childhood of someone, and now they've learned to live like that, and so they're never able to break out of those conditioned responses. Those conditioned responses and reflexes, they activate the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight, and that's what trauma is. These are neural signals called spike trains or action potentials, and these are encoding the information, especially the memory-based emotional associations of different nauseous stimulation. So whenever something comes up that kind of reactivates that trauma conditioning, you immediately go into your sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight. And you've learned through your childhood that when the sympathetic is activated, you need to retreat into your visual signals to block out any of the somatosensory pain reception. And that's what we call PTSD and psychosis and various conditions like that. So how do you live with that? How do you heal that? Well, when one of those conditioned responses comes up, you have to learn how to create new pathways, which is instead of retreating from it, you have to restore homeostasis. You have to bring back in the parasympathetic nervous system, which involves calming down, breathing deeply, and different sorts of exercises that no longer put you in your visual signals or no longer encourage the fight or flight. Now, I've used kind of the fundamental terminology. At the end of the day, that's what's happening. Now, there's a million and one different ways that may be traumatizing or that may activate the fight or flight. And that's when you now reapply all the knowledge that you've learned about these different fields and studies that tend to ignore the very fundamental sympathetic versus parasympathetic nervous systems, as well as the visual signals and the somatosensory signals. I hope this information helps for anyone who's had to grow up with that, any kind of neglect, abuse, any sort of discipline, narcissism, whatever the situation was. It's going to be about the dysregulation of the nervous system and your ability to handle that and to move through that instead of escaping it. Or if you are a parent watching this, your job with children is to teach them how to regulate their nervous system. Biologically, that's your most important job. Everything else we've kind of constructed with society and culture is non-specific aspects of human life, but the actual biological part is regulation of the sympathetic nervous system. As a final note, these are body-wide physiological processes. It's not like it's all in the brain or all in someone's head. These are carried in the body in different ways, in the gut, in the skin, the muscular skeletal system. It's all part of the systems of the body. And that's why you can tell in children or adults places of neuroticism, places of how they've grown up and the way that they carry themselves, the way that they talk and move, and kind of how they look and the way that they act and everything like that. These are all products or byproducts of how they've had to grow up with these different stores of trauma and how they've had to navigate the sympathetic experience, usually by escaping it. But that's kind of a different topic, which is based off of like how somatic do they seem to be? How are they slouching? How are their hips positioned when they're walking? How are they? How's their gaze averting? How are they breathing? How are they talking? All those kinds of things, those are all indications that you could technically learn, and it tells you things about their childhood or about how they deal with these sorts of fight or flight, rest and digest responses. But again, the point is it's not just a mental brain thing. It's your kinesthetics, it's your immune system, it's your microbiome, lymphatic system. All of those things, they're all part of the whole that goes on. So I just want to emphasize that as well. Of course, we can always keep talking about this, but I think that's it for this video. Thanks for watching.